We love Zencaster because it allows us to record the audio for our podcast and create the video segments we use for our weekly Sister Scoop episodes. Zencaster has helped us make content capture simple.
It's now super easy to record a podcast with Zencaster. Log in using your browser and start recording a high-quality podcast right away. Record studio quality sound and up to 4K video with your guests, and feel a sense of zen knowing Zencaster's multi-layered backups ensure you always have your recordings in the highest quality, even if the connection is unstable.
If you've thought about podcasting before and realized that you need a lot of different tools and services, those days are over. With Zencaster's all-in-one podcasting platform, you can create your podcast in one place and distribute it to Spotify, Apple, and other major destinations.
Just go to zencastr.com/pricing and use our code SistersAssembled, and you'll get 30% off your first month of any Zencaster paid plan. We want you to have the same easy experiences we do for all of our podcasting and content needs. It's time to share your story.
Katie and I are always hungry, and one snack we both love is beef jerky. That's why we're so excited to tell you about one of our favorite jerky brands, Matt Hat Jerky.
Matt Hat's delicious taste makes it a great snack, and the variety of flavors, including original, black truffle, and my personal favorite, roasted garlic, means there's a flavor for everyone. Plus, it's local to the area where we grew up in, which we just love.
Use the link in the show notes below to get some Matt Hat Jerky for yourself, and make sure to use our coupon code SistersAssembled for 10% off. Hello and welcome to Sisters Assembled, your home for all things MCU. And today we have our second breakout session related to the Thunderbolts coming at you. This time we're going to talk all things Sentry because we didn't get a chance to talk about him too much in the actual reactions because there was so much to talk about. So we thought we'd give our good friend Bob /Sentry /The Void his own episode because he's technically three people in one. So on that note, I'm going to let Katie kick us off because I know she's super, super pumped to talk all about this character.
I am, and I'm going to start by saying, or prefacing with, we obviously went very deep into the mental health aspects of this character. That's not to say that's not going to come up in part of this conversation, but we are not going to go quite as in-depth in that direction just because, like I said, we did a lot of that during our predictions. We had a lot of that conversation. So we're mainly going to look at him as a character, how we enjoyed him, how, we enjoyed the Void and him as an antagonist and kind of that part of the actual storyline. And then kind of talk about where Bob is going. I mean, he's coming back, right? We all know he's going to be in Doomsday. We already knew that from the whole chair montage, but he's going to be in Doomsday. We have some updates on where he stands with Sentry /The Void. So we're going to kind of discuss his future and that whole aspect as well. Getting right into him as a character in the movie. First off, live, laugh, love Bob, because I love him. From the second he showed up, I was like, and you are a new obsession. You are a new comfort character, and I adore you. Oh my God, he's such a cutie. I mean, okay, first off, he was in Top Gun Maverick, and I do remember him, and it was before this movie, because I couldn't figure out the whole time in the trailers why I thought he looked so familiar. And I was like, why do I keep thinking I know this guy from something? And I never looked it up. I wasn't bothered until I started seeing all the memes about him being Bob in Top Gun Maverick too. And I was like, oh, he was Bob. And it all made sense. But I think he's such a cutie. And I was like, yep, my new comfort character, add to the list. You are now one of them. But we literally adore Bob. I think Bob is such an interesting character because the version of him we have seems so different from how he describes himself prior to getting the Sentry serum. And so we almost have I don't want to compare him and say childlike state because it's not like he's acting 7, but he definitely has this innocence to him that I think obviously when he is Sentry and then really when he's the Void are stripped away when he kind of puts on these other that's the wrong way of saying it, but essentially puts on these other personas. You guys get what I'm trying to say. But I think it's so interesting knowing that, Bob was a meth head. We covered that in the predictions, that he was addicted to drugs. He calls himself a meth head, literally. He's like, I think of the chicken scene when he's like, I was on meth. So I think, we have such an interesting perspective of him because I don't think we really know Bob at all.
Yeah, I think you're right. He's such an interesting character because there's a clear before and after. You see him obviously at various stages of his life going through the shame rooms. You see him as a child dealing with, the trauma of living in an abusive household. We see him under the influence of drugs as the chicken sign holder guy, completely unhinged. I think there might be one or two others that I can't think of off the top of my head, but those versions of Bob are so different from the guy that we see. But I think it's interesting because to what you were saying about his innocence, I think that the version that we see in Thunderbolts and that we see with the team is kind of who he's always been, but on the inside, and that clearly he was like coping using drugs and things like that, and now that he is not doing that anymore since he got the treatment, the Sentry treatment, not going through actual treatment for addiction, he has been able to kind of allow himself to wear that vulnerability more outwardly. But then beyond that, I think because the team is so accepting of each other's, let's say, shaky pasts, we'll put it that way, he's also then able to continue to be that vulnerable guy because he knows that despite their challenges at the beginning, this team has his back. So I think it's almost like Bob is coming out of his shell in the Thunderbolts, but not in a way that he's becoming more outgoing, but in a way that he doesn't have to like mask using drugs or however else he was masking prior to, going through the treatment that made him Sentry.
Yeah, I'm inclined to agree. I also think something to consider, which honestly, I think, and I've only seen the movie once, I still would like to go on like a $5 Tuesday or something and see it again. But I think something people online have been kind of bringing up, which is something I remember, but I don't think I was considering as much, is also he has clear memory lapses. Part of it is because honestly, I don't know if I want to make this comparison just due to the differences in the mental health diagnoses, but it actually very much kind of reminds me a little bit, I should say Bob versus Sentry Void reminds me a little bit of what we get with Moon Knight.
Yep.
Obviously, I know he does not have DID. I understand that. That's kind of why I'm a little trepidatious against like doing that. But it very much though reminds me of like how Steven, when he'd stop being Mark, for example, would be back and kind of be like, okay, what just happened?
Yeah.
Because he had those memory lapses. He didn't have any recognition of how he got to where he got because he was Mark in those moments. Again, obviously very different diagnoses. I'm not saying that Bob has DID by any sense, but he has those memory lapses as well. When he was the Void, especially, because he spent the most time as the Void during Thunderbolts, he had those moments. Like as soon as he was done, he was like, "What's going on, guys?" Like he's totally like chilling. They're all like, "Oh God, he's insane, awesome." But like, I think that's another aspect to think about as well. Is there are clearly times that and memories that he is not able to fill in, and so there's a strong possibility. Yes, he knows things of his past, but he can't fully remember them and they're not all there. And quite frankly, I would not be surprised if some of the stuff was not things he just learned about himself over like the course of maybe the testing or he read something or whatever. And he was like, oh, okay, that was me versus like actually remembering it. So I do think that's an aspect to consider as well.
Yeah, for sure. And I think that kind of ties really interestingly or I don't want to say nicely because depression isn't nice, but it's a clear through line to kind of his mental state, prior to getting the Sentry serum and even after, of course, but focusing on that pre-serum time. We know he was an addict and dealing with that disease, but I think he also talks a lot about, the depression that he's dealing with. That wasn't something that came just because he went through the experiment. That was something that he's been struggling with his whole life. And in depression, you can get in these like spirals where you're not really fully experiencing things. It's like you're kind of separated from like life is happening around you and you are just like not really part of it. You're not processing it. Just you're kind of going through the motions. And I think that can kind of be potentially like the root of some of those memory lapses, not just because, he was potentially high as a kite, but also in other moments in a potentially very deep depression where he's not really processing exactly what's happening in his life. So, yes, to your point, like while those memory lapses mirror Mark's and Steven's, they are coming from a very different place, not where he's having a whole different personality, run his body, Bob. He's dealing with completely different mental states. And that's kind of leading to this memory loss, which then parallels really nicely to the void, which represents Bob's depression being something that causes these memory lapses because when he's the void, as you pointed out, he comes back and has absolutely no recollection of anything that he did in that state.
Right. And so I do think that's an interesting perspective to him as a character, but that's also kind of what allows Bob to be Bob because he, in the best of ways, is tethered to very little because he can't really remember it. And that's not a bad thing because, again, Bob is somebody who I've looked online. I know he's gotten quite a lot of followers, like very quickly. I am one of them. But I think that's to say that on the flip side, he does have these almost alter egos of the Sentry slash Void. And I think logistically, there's a lot to discuss with him as Sentry. I think Bob's a great character. I'm glad that the new Avengers and Bob will be seen in Doomsday. But I think we kind of have to figure out, are we only seeing Bob in Doomsday? Or will we be seeing Sentry and the Void? Because again, I think there's a lot of logistics we have to break down here. And the first for me, just personally on a high level to throw out there is as Sentry, we know his powers, we know what he's capable of. I mean, technically, I guess as the Void, he also is capable of these powers, but I'm just primarily talking about the Sentry side, the good side for now. We know he's invincible, we know all of this. One question I have is Bob invincible like that? Can he fly? Because I know the running joke is like, we'll ride Bob up into space and like that whole thing. Can I'm gonna hate asking this question, but I'm gonna ask it. Can they actually ride Bob up into space? Or would he need to be Sentry?
I think the latter. I think he needs to be Sentry for two reasons. I'm going to go back to our friend Megan, who is a expert to an extent that I am not. And she talked in the predictions episode about how he has to like power up from Bob to Sentry. So I don't think the powers necessarily like Bob can access them unless he's Sentry. The other thing that I think bolsters that argument, if you will, is that at the end, in the end credit scene, they like talk about and joke about how Bob's basically freeloading in Avengers Tower and not actually like, being a participatory member of the team except for doing the dishes. He does the dishes and that's a good man. But he says to them like there's no one without the other. Like I can't power up the Sentry without running the risk of letting the void loose.
Which I want to talk about that then too.
Oh, for sure, for sure. That's a meaty topic. But he's basically to me say it's not that he's saying I can't exist as Bob without the void coming out. He's saying Sentry can't come. So I think you've got kind of three things going on. You've got Bob, completely normal dude, though I do think he is somewhat invulnerable because we see him get shot like 3,000 times
True.
and he does fly. Actually, now I'm going back and I'm like, he did fly as Bob.
Yeah. Unless that line was a little blurry just
Right.
because
That's
he was
the
trying to
question.
like he was in a stressful state.
Yeah.
And was it that the Sentry part of him kind of just stepped up and like took over a little bit there or what?
Yeah, like I wonder if it was almost like the powers were like latent, right? Because he didn't seem to have them when he was in stasis before he got woken up. So I wonder if they were like latent living inside him. And then it was when he was in a time of duress, they come out to protect him. But your everyday Bob doesn't necessarily have these powers unless he's in like danger. In which case then he can like his body almost instinctually turns on the sentry in order to protect himself.
Okay, because that's something, like I said, logistically, I'm trying to understand him as a character. And part of it's because Bob Sentry Void, as a character in the comics, has how the comics have written him. Source material is important and it's always helpful. However, that is not always guaranteeing that the MCU version of them is going to be exactly to what they were in the comics.
Right.
And because of that, it's like, yes, maybe the comics can answer this question, but if we're only looking at Thunderbolts, Bob, Sentry Void, is this question or is this answer true?
Yeah.
Can we truthfully say, like, Bob himself has no powers, but Sentry and Void are like his power up, almost like the Power Rangers?
Oh, what a throwback.
Right. Or does Bob inherently have the abilities, or at least can bleed some of the Sentry abilities when his life is in danger, or to your point, like when he's stressed out? Like, these are things I'm trying to understand about, specifically more so the MCU version of Sentry.
Yeah, and I think honestly we're going to need to see him more to get that answer because I think to what we pointed out, he's saying one thing about what he can and can't do in order to activate the sentry, but then he's having a different experience earlier in the film where he is tapping into those same abilities without being the sentry.
Unless he was the Sentry in that moment
Yeah,
earlier in the film.
because we don't see him after he comes back to Earth. We don't see him again conscious until he's talking to Valentina
Right.
and she's already in his head.
Right.
So we don't really know like kind of what his mental state was.
Well, my point just kind of is like, and obviously, when all that's happening earlier in the film, I know he's not like officially the Sentry, but using that as kind of the symbolism that it is, it's possible he was the Sentry. Because here's the thing. Isn't the whole point of the metaphors and everything throughout this movie to show like it doesn't just happen? A high doesn't just get to a high, and a low doesn't just get to a low. And so I do think it's possible earlier in the film that was part of his high. That was the start of it. And so Sentry was present. And then he's still Sentry with Valentina. Then he's officially donned as Sentry, does everything he does battling the Thunderbolts. That's where that shift happens, and that's when the crash starts because he had to fight his friends. And that's when he starts to question everything, and that's when the high starts to drop, and we see him dropping, and then we see how he becomes the Void. So I wonder if on the flip side, he was technically the Sentry in those moments. It was just the start of the high, so it was like small moments, but he wasn't there yet. He wasn't at the top where he was going to flip into the Void and eventually crash.
I think that's a good interpretation. I definitely think that's, an option. It really, like I said, I want to see more of him. Obviously, I want to see more of him in general, but I also want to see more of him just to get more like data points on exactly how this works. Like whether that's dialogue like we got in the end credit scene or just seeing Bob through different scenarios. Maybe what does it look like when he does power up into the sentry? Is it a subtle change where suddenly he's holding his back a little straighter, he's standing a little taller, he's got a little bit more confidence, a little bit more gumption? Or is it like he looks totally different as the sentry than he does as Bob, which I think is true in some respects when Valentina dressed him up at least. But I want to see like what is that change? How subtle is it so that we can then use that to look back at past moments and be like, "Oh, see the way he was holding himself? That's a sure sign that he was, to your point, like at that high, he was feeling himself. He was sentry." Not just like mousy little Bob, nothing wrong with mousy little Bob, but he wasn't mousy little Bob in that moment. And we can tell the difference simply by the way he's, holding himself versus like, oh, this is a marked difference. He just happened to be a little bit in the gray in some of these earlier moments.
Well, very similar to how they handled Moon Knight. It's the same kind of concept. How you could tell when he switched off from being Steven and became Mark.
Yeah.
Like moments like that. And just, it was small stuff, but you could just see the different body language. So if you started the show at any random moment, you knew.
Yeah.
You could sit there and be like, oh, from this exact thing, that's Mark. Oh no, because he did this, that's Steven. Like, so I do think maybe kind of in that same vein, yes, that we kind of get almost a blueprint over time. My next question gets into a territory that I think is vital, but going to be hard to answer. He blatantly said, as you already pointed out, that the Void and Sentry cannot exist without the other one.
Hmm.
I guess my question, quite frankly, is that period the end? No more ability to say anything else? Or is that his understanding for the time being? To keep people safe from the Void, the Sentry cannot come out. He cannot be Sentry at any given point without the Void possibly coming out. And that's how he perceives it. Or is that it? Is that just his perception? Is there a possibility that we will be able to separate Sentry from the Void?
This is a weighty question. And honestly, I feel like I have read so many articles because at this point, you have to go back to the source material, right? You have to go back to the comics because it's the only real point of reference we have beyond Bob in this film, which, to your point, we're getting his perception of the problem versus what is the background on what the reality could be, aka the comics. And I will not lie. I probably read 3 or 4 articles in preparation of this episode, and I could not tell you.
No, girl, I was doing the same thing and I was like, I cannot get a blatant answer about this.
No, like it's so fascinating because I swear I read like the Marvel character synopsis. I was reading articles. I'm pretty sure I was on the wiki at one point. Like all of my usual sources that can tell me like TLDR, this is what you need to know about this character. And I honestly am still so confused about kind of the interrelationship between Sentry and the Void and how that all works. And I don't know if it's one of those things where you have to actually read the comic to truly understand, in which case, fine, I will go find one at some point. But it's a long way of saying I don't have a definitive answer for you because I honestly am really struggling to understand how these characters, Sentry and the Void, who I consider two different characters, relate to one another, especially like as it relates to Bob's corporeal body. Like, are they sharing the same body? Are they not sharing the same body? Can one exist outside of the body? I am confused because the answer to that changes my answer to how one can or cannot exist without the other.
Okay, so here's my thing. I was also doing my research. And when in doubt, I hit up Reddit. Why not? I kid you not. Like, I find the best answers to the questions I need half the time on Reddit. Somebody's got a better answer than anybody else could ever give me. And it was kind of interesting because as I was going through, there were a lot of different explanations on people trying to explain Sentry and the Void. Somebody said about, when he took the serum, it essentially kind of split him in half. So Sentry became one half of him, Void came the other half. Somebody else was pointing out that the Void actually technically exists like from like 16, it was either 1600 BD or AD. So like the Void has existed long before Bob existed. I mean, there were a lot of different things that people were giving, which were good, but also in the same sense, very difficult to learn for sure how to view this. And again, to what we were saying earlier, and then you kind of brought up the source material. Awesome, great. That still might not be how the MCU is going to play this.
And not to mention about the source material, the one thing to think about too there is like characters evolve. The way they are written, the way their powers are written. Honestly, sometimes origin stories are rewritten. So all of these things can be true at the same time, just at different points in Sentry's history as a character. So that adds like another layer of complication because I think when Megan was on, she was talking about how he actually has like multiple origin stories, and the drug addict one happens to be the most popular, but he has multiple. So, like, that's the other thing that adds a challenging piece to this is yeah, you can go to the source material, but the source material could tell you 6 different answers depending on the time period.
Right. And so that's why I was going to say if we're only looking at the MCU version of him and what we've learned, my understanding is the only way you are going to be able to get the Sentry without Void if that is what we are doing, if that is the future plan, which we'll get to that next, is they have to go through some sort of battle, like whether it's another inner battle or what, and he does kill the void inside of him. I don't know. I don't know the logistics of that because I know the whole the whole metaphor of the movie was like, don't do that and don't answer it with anger and all that stuff, and your friends can pull you back. Look, and I get the metaphor. So, but like ignoring the metaphor, theoretically, I would think.
I get the metaphor, but we're just gonna toss it to the side.
Well, just toss it aside just for like the idea here is that I would think if he were to kind of reside back into himself like he did and go against the void, but maybe not in the same fashion, if he can defeat him from within. But that's really the only way I could think about it, unless like there's a way he gets injected with more serum of some kind that allows him to split it. I don't know, because that the reason I bring that up is because from my understanding when I was reading this Reddit thread and reading some of these people's responses is the void, going back to that person who said that the void existed since like 1600 AD or BD or BC or whatever, the void itself is not necessarily tied to Bob.
A mantle, maybe, sort of.
Yeah, sort of. Sort of. Like, again, not my best choice of words, but essentially like possessing him. He is in his body for the time being. So, if we go off of maybe that thought process that the void is such a separate entity that he can be removed, theoretically, that's what we do. Because here's something I think I said even in the reactions episode when we briefly got to talk about this was obviously we're not going to sideline Sentry forever. We cannot do that. He is one of the most powerful characters that exists in Marvel. That being said, you have the options of you either figure out a way to essentially Carol Danvers him and take the handcuffs and take her other arm out from behind his back and allow him to figure out how to be the Sentry without Void, or we got to figure out how to control Void.
Yeah, I mean, I think the third option there is, and this bridges nicely into the final topic, the future of Sentry. If the threat is bad enough, do you just run the risk of potentially letting the void out because you need the Sentry to help save the day?
Well, and I'm so glad you said that because I know people are making, we'll get into why you said that, but I also know people are making jokes online about like the second Yelena's in trouble. But like, yeah, guys, actually, that's what they were setting up. That's what they were setting up. And I'm not even just saying Yelena, probably all the Thunderbolts, but especially Yelena. Like, as soon as one of his members of his family are in any sort of danger, you know he is going to put all aside and just go full in because he knows he has the ability to help them, one. And he, again, is one of the strongest characters in Marvel. But why I know you said that was because obviously we know Doctor Doom is coming. And again, Bob is returning in Doomsday. We know that. Do we kind of just say, let's do it? Let's just let the void out and, or I should say, let's just let Sentry out and run the risk of letting the void out. And really, is the void bad if we can make sure that he goes after Doom?
So I have a very specific theory for this, actually, that has been kind of baking for me for a little bit now.
Okay.
And I actually think it kind of works well with the trajectory that we know is going to happen, and it deals with some of the ambiguity around Doomsday. I keep coming back to this in literally every episode because there's no getting around the fact that we still don't truly have an understanding of what the actual plot of Doomsday will be. I still am very unclear personally, and maybe I've just missed a few articles. I'm not sure if there's even a specific comic source material that has been identified as the breadcrumbs for the plot. To my knowledge, we don't have that yet. We know there are lines about Doctor Doom, and those could be pieces that are pulled from, of course, but I don't think we've said, okay, this is a specific comic that we think is going to be, again, like the backbone of Doomsday. So not knowing truly what Doomsday is going to be about, other than it's going to, or it should, based on the fact that very few films come out in between, should lead into Secret Wars. We are going to get an evolving Doctor Doom in Doomsday. At some point, he is going to go from your run-of-the-mill Doctor Doom to God Doom. And that is who he is going to be in Secret Wars, the leader, the king, I think, if I'm remembering his title correctly, of Battleworld. So, my theory, having said all of that, is that we're going to see, the Fantastic Four come in Doomsday, obviously, based on the end of the end credit. If you want to take it at face value, listen to our last episode where we put out a few theories why that may or may not be exactly what's happening. But you're going to have Doom in there. You're going to have him probably fighting the Thunderbolts. But I don't think he's going to be at a threat level where Bob's going to feel like he needs to release Sentry. So I think we're going to see him kind of tagging along for a lot of Doomsday. And it's not until Doom levels up to God Doom where very few other characters are going to be able to really face him at that level with any hope of, coming out alive or any level of success. That's when Sentry is going to be unleashed, because we're going to see a power and a villain, the likes of which we probably have not seen in the MCU. I'm even counting Thanos with the gauntlet.
No, I think that's all a very fair observation and theory, because I do think, well, also just from a basis of where Bob is, like, I don't expect him to be Sentry 5 minutes into the film.
Yeah.
Like, that's just not really where I see that happening. I also think the blueprint, and by blueprint, I mean it's only happened once, is that they don't obviously win during the first half of these team ups. Second half, they come back, they beat the bad guy, yay, yippee. But let's remember, like, the second half of this is Secret Wars, guys.
Very specific comic.
Yeah, like, it's not your run of the mill, oh, we're just going into Endgame to, like, time travel and get all the stones and, like, undo it. No, like, yes, Infinity War and Endgame, it was the direct consequence, but, like, this is a different type of direct consequence. And so I do think, because that's going to be a little bit different too on how this movie itself ends, because I don't see them necessarily losing. Really losing is Battleworld happening.
Mm-hmm.
Is getting to Secret Wars. And so it's kind of exciting. Like, I'm excited. But, like, we're not going to have a dejected team of Avengers standing there after half of their teammates just disintegrated. Like, I don't expect to see that. So, that being said, I do think I could see him being one of those that tries to go against Doom, but I think it would actually be before Doom hits let's say, like, final boss mode, because I actually think that is going to be the end of the movie. I think that's how we enter into Secret Wars. So I actually think it's them in the process of trying to stop him as he's getting there, but not like super early on. But I don't see him being there quite yet. I do, however, see the possibility of unleashing Sentry and therefore the Void actually severely backfiring on them and being part of the reason Doom's actually able to finish his evolution, if you will.
That's very valid as well. I think the one thing I want to point out, and you definitely hinted at this when you were talking about, is Doomsday directly going to lead into Secret Wars the same way that we saw Infinity War do so for Endgame? The thing that's important to remember too about Secret Wars is the pieces are already in place in terms of like the ball's already rolling. Secret Wars is caused by a series of incursions. Though they've only been mentioned once, much to our chagrin, we know that incursions are happening. We saw one in MOM. We know that Doctor Strange himself caused one at the end of MOM. So, literally, the dominoes are starting to fall. So, it's not even that whatever Doctor Doom does necessarily in Doomsday is going to cause Secret Wars. It's that he probably, in my opinion, already sees the writing on the wall. He's a very intelligent man. He probably is recognizing the signs the same way that maybe a Reed Richards is recognizing the signs of the collapse of the multiverse, and is smart enough to position himself in a way to get power to do that. That could actually be what the plot of Doomsday is his manipulation of the multiverse to set himself up for becoming the final boss, as you said. So maybe what they're doing in Doomsday is actually, trying to stop him as he sets these pieces in motion. And to what you were saying about, the Void backfiring, that totally could. I mean, if he's literally swallowing worlds, right? If he gets that far where they're going across multiverses and he's swallowing entire worlds and he's getting that powerful, isn't that going to help Doom potentially, depending on what his actual goal is with how he's gaining the power within the true multiversal collapse? So that's just something to put out there as well, is like there's so much happening in parallel already underneath all of the properties that we're watching that Doomsday, I don't know, like it's going to be an interesting one, and I think Sentry and the Void are potentially being set up to be both a really big help and a really really big hindrance for the team depending on at what point he's unleashed and what the way Doom is going about potentially trying to achieve his goals.
Well, and quite frankly, maybe he is never technically released by the good guys. Maybe Doom knows who to go after. There's a lot to kind of consider in all of this. And I think with Sentry's future so unclear, primarily just like how he can exist without the void, can he exist without the void at all? And like what that looks like. Because he's not going to just be Bob running around a battlefield. I love Bob, but like he's not going to do that. He can't. Because he will just be in the way, and that's just going to be a whole lot of whatever. And for a movie this big, we do not have the ability to have him out there not doing anything of value.
Mhm.
So I do think, I'm almost 100% sure. You just reminded me that I had been reading an article that had actually been talking about the fact that Sentry was going to be a pretty big role in Doomsday, like play a pretty prominent role in Doomsday. I'm actually almost 100% sure I just read that Lewis Pullman just was talking about that.
I'm sure the studio loved that.
They've got a couple that they need to have a talking to. But that being said, like that can factor in a lot of what we've been talking about and how him not being able to control the void can very quickly shift this narrative, even if he doesn't mean for it to. So I will be intrigued to everything you've said. I agree. We don't even know what Doomsday's about. Apparently, RDJ is playing 4 different versions of whatever character he's going to be. Iron Man, Doctor Doom, we don't even know. So, like, I don't know what to even expect here, but I do know it's going to be interesting when you factor in the void.
Yeah. I think even more than the Sentry and as powerful as the Sentry is, the Void is such a wild card in that he doesn't have clear motives other than to hurt as many people as Sentry saves. And I think that's the other piece here is like the yin to the yang. So if Sentry's able to save, millions of people on in a universe because they're going up against Doom who's angling for power. Imagine what the Void is going to do then to balance the scales to save that many people at scale. I mean, that's like crazy to think about, but that's really his only like motivation. He doesn't necessarily want, at least in my knowledge, he doesn't want power. He's not tempted by wealth or anything like that. Like it's truly to thwart everything that the Sentry does, which makes him, I think, a very unique character in that way that he's not interested in the trappings that a lot of villains are.
Yes, but I would argue I'm not sure I fully agree with that for the MCU version. Not about like the trappings, but I actually don't know if I would agree that the MCU version, from what I saw, has that same vengeance against the good guy, if you will. To me, because of the direction and not saying that the comics obviously did not take it in the direction of understanding depression and mental health, but I think with the way Thunderbolts kind of portrayed it, because they were making it that bigger metaphor, I don't think the void, in my opinion, I don't want to say petty, but kinda, because to me it didn't come across that he was doing what he was doing to get back at Bob or the Sentry for being a quote unquote good guy. So I do kind of think, and also I didn't get that he was malicious in that intent either. I actually just kind of was getting that. I don't know. It's hard to describe, but I just like the guy was miserable and he was like, y'all coming with me.
Yeah, like I think for me, I interpreted a lot of the Void and his behavior, especially like within the Void itself, when it's Bob against the Void, like it's a lot of self hatred, right? Like that's
Right.
a lot of what that represented. It's self doubt, self hatred. But I do wonder, even though he never really presented that kind of motive to thwart Bob in the Thunderbolts, I wonder if it's something that he will develop going forward because of that confrontation. Because he does, like, when they're fighting and Bob is like beating the crap out of the Void's taunting him. He's like, "How did you ever think you would amount to anything?" And all of the, the horrible things that he was saying, that negative inner monologue literally given physical form. And I could see a world where, because Bob has a support system, because Bob is making something of himself, he's an Avenger, even if he's just the Avengers dishwasher. If that self doubt then becomes this way of saying, "Who do you think you are? Some hero? Some guy who gets to deserve all these good things? I'll show you what you really are," and then is doing the exact opposite and hurting people. So I wonder if we've almost seen the genesis of that vindictive hatred in that fight scene between the Void and Bob.
I mean, that's very possible, and that might be something that we see as he comes on the screen more and we get to figure out a little bit more about the character. The only thing I'm going to add, just really quick, which is just kind of on topic to Doomsday and everything of that nature, is when I was doing a little bit of background research, there was an article that was ranking the 10 people who could beat Sentry. And, well, one just notable name, because I'm not going to go without mentioning her on an episode, is the Scarlet Witch.
Naturally.
Yeah, which nobody's, I mean, he thinks life's bad when he's the Void. Like, she can make your life a whole lot worse. But I just think, like, imagine what that girl could do to this mentally unstable man. Like,
She would literally have him like in shreds.
yeah, yeah. But I will say, number one on the list was Doctor Doom. So do with that what you will. Not saying there's much to get into there. Just some fun knowledge to have.
Also, fun fact, this is only related, not related to Doomsday, but related to the list, because I'm sure this character was on there. Null rips the Sentry in half.
Well, that's how he dies. He actually dies in King in Black.
Yeah, he rips, and because you keep me honest here, but he rips the Sentry in half and then like absorbs the Void, right? That's what Null does?
I think so.
Yeah.
That's what I mean. Like, the Void is to be seen as, like, honestly, Venom. You know what? That's what I was trying to think about this whole time when I was saying, like, this alter ego and all these words I was using and I couldn't think of it. He's almost like a parasite.
Yeah.
Like, he's just happened to hook on to Bob, especially right now with, like, him being the Sentry. Like, it all happened to happen all at once. But, like, he can live without him. He's not just Bob's problem. He can, in fact, find a different, pretty much, host. So it is almost like he's a parasite.
Yeah, he just likes Bob's depression to feed on it. Poor Bob.
Right. Bob just gives him more to kind of run with, but he could live on.
Interesting. Yeah, I mean, look, this character is so fun in the sense that there's so much that can be done with him. Obviously, not fun that he deals with a lot of the mental health challenges that he does, but I think it's so ripe for rich storytelling from an emotional standpoint. He's so powerful, so you can also tell really, interesting set pieces from a fighting standpoint and a conflict standpoint with him. He can go up against some of the big dogs when it comes to villains and power and things like that. So it's a character I'm very, very excited to continue to see in the MCU, knowing that he's going to be in two of the big ones coming up, or at least Doomsday, assuming he survives. He'll be in Secret Wars. So I'm really excited. If you are also looking forward to our future coverage as we start to ramp up into Doomsday, knowing it's just about a year away, crazy, please follow on your podcast platform of choice. You can also check out the links below for some good stuff like our website and our Buy Me a Coffee if you're interested in supporting the show.
You guys can also check us out on all of our socials, which are also linked in the show notes below. And sadly, this does end our time covering the Thunderbolts, but we will be moving on to bigger things as more content comes our way, but not next week because we will be on vacation. So we will not have an episode next week. We will be back in 2 weeks and good things will be happening then, we promise. In the meantime, as always, Marvel just blew your mind, so let's talk about it.